Let's talk about sleep and tools to optimize your sleep. Today, I'm mainly going to focus on the practical tools that anyone, indeed all people I believe, should use in order to optimize their sleep. Why should everybody want to optimize their sleep and put considerable effort into optimizing their sleep? Well, put simply, sleep is the foundation of mental health, physical health, and performance of all kinds, cognitive performance, physical performance, etc. It also controls things like our immune system, wound healing, our skin health, and our appearance. Whether or not we can think clearly or not, whether or not we will live as long as we possibly can or not, whether or not we suffer from dramatic age-related cognitive decline or not, in other words, whether or not we keep our memory as we age. I could go on and on about all the terrible things that can happen to somebody if they don't sleep well. Main levers and tools that are going to allow you to control when you are awake and when you are asleep and to get better sleep every single night are light, literally photons, light energy. Could be from sunlight, could be from artificial light. We will discuss those particulars in a moment, as well as darkness. That is the absence of light. So we've got light and dark. Those are two very powerful tools to encourage your nervous system to be in one state or another, meaning awake or asleep. Temperature is another tool or lever. Turns out that when your body is cooling down, you have a greater tendency to fall and stay asleep. In fact, every night when you actually sleep, your body is dropping by 1 to 3 degrees, and that drop in temperature is required. It's like a gate that your body has to go through in order for you to get into sleep. And in fact, the converse is also true. If your body heats up by 1 to 3 degrees or so, you will wake up. So you've got light, dark, temperature, food. And when we say food, we mean what we eat, when we eat, and the amount that we eat. Another potent lever for adjusting your sleepiness and wakefulness is caffeine. This, of course, comes as no surprise to people, but why and how caffeine works might come as a surprise. Very briefly, we have a molecule in our body called adenosine, and the longer we have been awake, the more adenosine builds up in our brain and body, and adenosine is part of the reason why we get sleepy. Caffeine effectively operates as a adenosine antagonist. It works by basically occupying the receptor for adenosine, so it's a little bit of a convoluted mechanism, but basically all you need to know is that caffeine prevents the actions of adenosine. That's one of the reasons why caffeine makes us feel alert. But how much caffeine we drink and when we drink caffeine turns out to be vitally important for adjusting our wakefulness and for optimizing our sleep. So we'll talk about that as well. The other category of lever tools, which are immensely powerful for optimizing sleep, are supplements. There now exist as many as 8 different supplements that can powerfully modulate sleep in healthy ways and that have huge margins for safety. So we're going to talk about what those supplements are. In previous episodes of this podcast and as a guest on other podcasts, I've talked about 3 particular supplements: magnesium threonate, apigenin, and theanine, which together can really enhance the speed at which one falls asleep and people's ability to stay asleep and to really get into those deep stages of sleep that are particularly restorative. Let's consider what the perfect 24-hour cycle would look like. Let's start this 24-hour cycle with when you wake up in the morning. So for some of you, that will be 5 a.m. For others of you, that will be 10 a.m. Most people, I believe, wake up sometime between 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. But regardless of when you wake up in the morning, one of the first things that happens is that your body temperature is increasing. And that's just going to happen naturally. Some of it is going to be the consequence of your moving around a bit, but really the increase in body temperature is one of the main triggers for why you woke up in the first place. That increase in body temperature, in turn, causes an increase in the release of a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is often discussed as a stress hormone, but it's not just associated with stress. It also enhances your immune system, provided cortisol is elevated at the right times. And the right time for cortisol to be elevated is when you first wake up in the morning. That increase in cortisol is also going to increase metabolism. It's also going to increase your ability to focus mentally and for you to move your body. So again, cortisol is often demonized and considered this bad thing. And indeed, you don't want cortisol to be chronically or consistently elevated throughout the day or night. But you do want cortisol to reach its peak early in the day, right about the time you wake up. One way that you can ensure that that cortisol peak occurs early in the day, right about the time that you wake up, is to view bright light, ideally from sunlight, within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. But everybody, whether or not you live in a cloudy place or a sunny place, whether or not there's cloud cover or not that day, should really strive to get bright light in your eyes, ideally from sunlight, within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. The reason for that is very simple. You want to trigger that cortisol increase to occur very early in your day. And you don't want that cortisol peak to happen later, which is what will happen if you wait to get outside and see sunlight. The reason for this is that you have a set of neurons, nerve cells in your eye. They're called intrinsically photosensitive melanopsin cells, but you do not need to know that name. Those neurons respond best to bright light, and especially right after waking early in the day, they are best able to signal to a set of neurons that reside over the roof of your mouth, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a cluster of neurons that then sends a huge number of other signals, electrical and chemical, out to your entire body that triggers that cortisol increase, provides a wake-up signal for your brain and body, and sets in motion a timer for you to fall asleep later that night. But here's what you do, or at least here's what I do. I wake up in the morning and I want to reach for my phone. But I know that even if I were to crank up the brightness on that phone screen, it's not bright enough to trigger that cortisol spike and for me to be at my most alert and focused throughout the day and to optimize my sleep at night. So what I do is I get out of bed and I go outside. And if it's a bright, clear day and the sun is low in the sky or the sun is, starting to get overhead, what we call low solar angle, then I know I'm getting outside at the right time. If there's cloud cover and I can't see the sun, I also know I'm doing a good thing because it turns out, especially on cloudy days, you want to get outside and get as much light energy or photons in your eyes. But let's say it's a very clear day and I can see where the sun is. I do not need to stare directly into the sun. If it's very low in the sky, I might do that because it's not going to be very painful to my eyes. However, if the sun is a little bit brighter and a little bit higher in the sky, sometimes it can be painful to look at. So the way to get this sunlight viewing early in the day is to look toward the sun. If it's too bright to look at directly, well, then don't do that. You just look toward it, but not directly at it. It's absolutely fine to blink. In fact, I encourage you to blink whenever you feel the impulse to blink. Never look at any light, sunlight or otherwise, that's so bright that it's painful to look at because you can damage your eyes. But for this morning sunlight viewing, it's best to not wear sunglasses. That's right, to not wear sunglasses, at least for this morning sunlight viewing. It is absolutely fine to wear eyeglasses or contact lenses, so-called corrective lenses. In fact, those will serve you well in this practice or this tool because they will focus the light onto your neural retina and onto those melanopsin intrinsically photosensitive ganglion cells. If your eyeglasses or contact lenses have UV protection, that's okay. There's so many different wavelengths of light coming from the sun, and they are bright enough that they will trigger the mechanisms that you want triggered at this early time of day. So try and get outside, ideally within the first 5 minutes of waking, or maybe it's 15 minutes, but certainly within the first hour after waking. The bright artificial lights in your home environment are not going to be sufficiently bright to turn on the cortisol mechanism and the other wake-up mechanisms that you need early in the day. The diabolical twist, however, is that those lights in your home or apartment, or even on your phone, are bright enough to disrupt your sleep if you look at them too late at night or in the middle of the night. So there's this asymmetry in our retinal, our eye biology, and in our brain's biology, whereby early in the day, right around waking, you need a lot of light, a lot of photons, a lot of light energy. And artificial lights generally just won't accomplish what you need them to accomplish. But at night, even a little bit of artificial light can really mess up your so-called circadian, your 24-hour clocks, and all these mechanisms that we're talking about. It's really nice to get outside first thing in the morning and get the sunlight. In fact, when you start doing this, you'll notice that your body will start to feel more energized, and it will feel more energized more quickly. You'll actually start to notice this mechanism kicking in each day, especially if you're paying attention to your physiology. fundamentally speaking, get that morning sunlight viewing. I promise you will be grateful that you did. It makes everybody feel better, feel more alert, and it will greatly assist with your ability to fall and stay asleep later that night. Now, once you've woken up and you want to be awake, okay, so this is likely to be early in the day if you're following a more standard schedule, you will also want to leverage not just light, but temperature as a tool. If you are inclined, it would be wise to try and increase your core body temperature a bit more quickly than it would otherwise if you were to just, shuffle around outside, get your sunlight, maybe read a little bit, etc. And there are two main ways you can do that. The first way is to get into cold water of some sort. So this could be a cold shower of anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. This could be an ice bath, if that's your thing. It could be a cold tub, or if you own a cold tub that's specifically designed for deliberate cold exposure, get under some cold water. That will certainly wake you up. And if you've ever jumped into cold water or had a cold shower, you know it really wakes you up because you release adrenaline, epinephrine from both your brain and body. The body from your adrenals and your brain from a little cluster of neurons called locus coeruleus. Again, the names don't matter. 1 to 3 minutes of cold water exposure will wake you up because of that adrenaline release. And I want to highlight and it will serve to increase your core body temperature. That's right. Your body and brain interact as a bit of a thermostat system where if you put something cold on the surface of your body, your brain, a little cluster of neurons in the so-called medial preoptic area, act as a thermostat and say, the external of my body is cold, and therefore I'm going to heat up my core body temperature. So this is a little bit paradoxical. People think, if you get into cold water or an ice bath, your body temperature is going to drop. And indeed, that's true if you stay in for a while. But if you just get in for about 1 to 3 minutes or under the cold shower for 1 to 3 minutes, your core body temperature will increase. So then when you get out of that cold water, your body temperature is increasing at a rate, at a slope that's steeper than it would otherwise, and you're going to feel more alert. It also has the advantage of increasing not just adrenaline, but dopamine, which is a molecule involved in motivation, focus, etc. So this is great for waking up. Here's what I suggest. If you want to be alert early in the day and you want to sleep great at night, get that bright sunlight, get into some cold water, and if you don't want to get into some cold water, try and get some movement. It could be a walk, so you can get your sunlight exposure while you're taking a walk first thing in the morning. It could be a light jog. It could be skipping rope. These days, I skip rope for about 10 minutes or 20 minutes while looking at the sun. So I'm trying to layer in these different things for waking up. And then I take a cold shower afterwards. This is what I've been doing as of lately, but I don't do that all year long necessarily. So get that exercise or even just a modest amount of movement, walking, jogging, skipping rope, some light calisthenics. That will further increase your core body temperature and help you feel more awake. So the next category of tool for use early in the day is caffeine. So caffeine is something that a lot of people consume early in the day. How much depends on your tolerance, and there's a lot of individual variability here. Again, caffeine is a adenosine antagonist, or effectively works as a adenosine antagonist and limits sleepiness. I highly recommend that everybody delay their caffeine intake for 90 to 120 minutes after waking. However painful it may be to eventually arrive at that 90 to 120 minutes after waking, you want, and I encourage you to clear out whatever residual adenosine is circulating in your system in that first 90 to 120 minutes of the day. Get that sunlight exposure, get some movement to wake up, and then, and only then, start to ingest caffeine. Because what you'll do if you delay caffeine intake until 90 to 120 minutes after waking is you will avoid this so-called afternoon crash. And you may still get a little bit of dip in energy in the afternoon, but it's not going to be that massive crash. I've talked about the reasons for that crash on previous episodes, but if you delay your caffeine intake 90 to 120 minutes after waking, you are doing yourself a great service towards wakefulness and to avoid the crash. And the afternoon crash has another liability to it, which is typically people will emerge from that afternoon crash either grumpy or groggy, and then they'll lean into drinking more caffeine, which can then disrupt their sleep. So wait 90 to 120 minutes after waking in the morning to drink caffeine. And if you drink caffeine at any point throughout the day, really try and avoid any caffeine. Certainly avoid drinking more than 100 milligrams of caffeine after 4 p.m. and probably even better to limit your last caffeine intake to 3 p.m. or even 2 p.m. And for many people, shifting that caffeine intake from immediately after waking in the morning to 90 to 120 minutes gives them a much longer arc of energy throughout the day, and they don't feel the need to drink more caffeine later in the afternoon. If you do drink caffeine later in the afternoon, really try and limit the total amount or drink decaf. Certainly keep the total amount to less than 100 milligrams if you are interested in getting into the best possible sleep. And I say this knowing that many people, including myself, can drink a double espresso with 200 milligrams of caffeine or more at 5 p.m. or even 6 p.m. or after dinner and still, quote unquote, fall asleep fine or still sleep fine. However, there are terrific data. Matt Walker and I talked about this, and there are more and more papers all the time that point to the fact that caffeine intake late in the day, after 4 p.m. that is, can really disrupt the architecture of your sleep. So you might think you're sleeping well, but you're not sleeping nearly as well as you could if you avoided caffeine in those afternoon hours. Now, the other lever or tool that you have available to you is food. Now, food is an interesting lever or tool because it's not just about when you eat, but it's also about what you eat. What you eat for your breakfast, or if you choose to not eat breakfast, is really up to you. All that said, if you eat a very large meal, it doesn't matter if you slept terrifically well 10 hours the night before, or if you are about to go to sleep, or if it's the middle of the afternoon. If your gut is full of food, there's just a large volume of food in your gut, it's going to divert a lot of blood and other critical resources away from other organs of your body, in particular your brain, and you're going to be sleepy after eating a big meal. So this is sort of a duh, but I think oftentimes in the discussions about what to eat for energy, people neglect to consider food volume as a strong parameter or variable in that discussion. So if you eat a huge breakfast, it's likely that you are going to be tired immediately after eating that breakfast, unless, of course, you exercise very hard prior to that and you metabolize all that food very quickly. So it's up to you whether or not to eat first thing in the morning or not. But if you do eat in the first few hours of the morning, just understand that you are setting, or you are helping to set, a food entrained, as it's called, circadian clock. Light, temperature, timing of food intake, movement and exercise, all of these things literally funnel in a neural sense. They funnel into this thing that we call the circadian clock, and they let that clock, that set of neurons, predict when you are likely to be eating and active and viewing sunlight the next day and the next day and the next day. You may ask, what are the things that you can do throughout the day, the middle of your day and into the afternoon and evening hours, that are really going to set you up for the best possible sleep later that night? So should you be looking at sunlight or bright artificial lights throughout the day? Now, on the face of it, you might just think, yes, sunlight's great. Provided we're not getting a sunburn, we're not staring at the sun and damaging our eyes, we should get as much sunlight as we possibly can. In fact, we talked about this in the episode on hormones, about how getting light onto as much of our skin as we can throughout the day can really help in the production of testosterone and estrogen in both men and women in healthy ways that improves mood and libido and all sorts of things that are associated with well-being. However, because light is such a powerful stimulus for controlling the timing of your sleepfulness, or sleepiness, I should say, and wakefulness, we might want to be cautious about how much light we are viewing in the afternoon, in particular in the early evening hours, right? Well, turns out it's not so straightforward. Viewing, so sunlight to the eyes, sunlight in the late afternoon and evening hours, so again, depends on time of year, depends on location that you happen to be in, but getting some sunlight in your eyes for, again, maybe 5 or 10, maybe 30 minutes, depending on how much cloud cover there is, doing that in the afternoon serves an additional beneficial purpose, which is you protect, or you inoculate your nervous system against some of the negative effects of bright artificial light or even dim artificial light in the nighttime hours between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m., which is really critical period 3. And we'll talk about what to do and what to not do during critical period 3 of every 24-hour cycle. But to make it very clear what I'm saying here, get that morning sunlight in your eyes, but also get some sunlight in your eyes in the late afternoon and evening hours when the sun is at so-called low solar angle, when it starts to descend in the sky. Again, you don't have to stare directly at the sun, although if you can catch a nice, beautiful sunset, go for it. But as the sun starts to descend, it triggers those same neurons in your eye that communicate with your circadian clock, but it communicates with a different component or different compartment within the circadian clock. That circadian clock is not just one thing, it's multiple things. And you have what are called morning oscillators and evening oscillators. And to make a long story short, the tool that I'm describing of looking at the sun in the late afternoon and evening, again, blinking is fine, don't stare at the sun, but getting that sunlight in your eyes in the late afternoon and evening signals to that clock that it's evening time and that sleep is coming. It also serves as a second anchor or reference point for your body and your brain to know where it is in time. Well, those yellows and blues and oranges that you see in the evening sunsets, those signal to your brain and body that evening is there and that nighttime is coming. And they're really establishing a second reference point or wavefront of biological signals that are going to optimize your nighttime hours and your transition into really terrific sleep. So now let's talk about what I'm calling critical period 3 of each 24-hour cycle. So this would be the period of time of late evening, so it might be 6 p.m. for some, depending on when you go to sleep, or 7 p.m., extending into the hours in which you decide to get into bed and go to sleep, and then throughout the night. I should mention that the reason overhead lights are problematic is the same reason why sunlight is so great early in the day, which is that the cells, that is the neurons that can wake up your brain and body through activation of the circadian clock, reside mainly in the bottom half or 2/3 of your neural retina. And the way the optics of your eyes work is that the cells on the bottom half of your eye view the upper visual field. So this is a beautiful adaptive mechanism that allows these cells to respond to overhead light from sunlight in the early part of the day and throughout the day. But in the evening, if you have bright artificial lights on and those bright artificial lights are overhead lights, it's going to more closely mimic what sunlight does in the evening time. And that turns out to be a bad thing if your goal is to eventually go to sleep. So again, do like the Scandinavians do. Use lights that are set low in the room at night. And if you really want to optimize your sleep-wake cycles, I suppose you could also do the opposite throughout the day. You could really emphasize the use of bright artificial lights and sunlight that comes from above. And of course, sunlight always comes from above. But if you're working in a given, office environment and, it's 2 p.m. or 3 p.m. and you want to be as awake as possible, really crank up the overhead lights. And then in the evening, which is this critical period 3 that we're referring to, really try and dim those lights or have them off or just rely on candlelight or moonlight from the hours of about 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. Now that's light, but as you recall, we also have this tool related to temperature. And you're probably not going to be surprised that the way to leverage temperature in the evening is the exact opposite of the way that you want to leverage temperature early in the day. Early in the day, temperature increases from cold showers or exercise, etc., wake you up. What that means is that taking a cold shower late at night is probably a bad idea. Rather, taking a nice hot bath or a sauna, you might think would heat up your body. And indeed, that's what happens if you stay in a very long time. But if you do hot tub or a hot bath or a sauna in the evening and you don't stay in for more than 20 or 30 minutes and you get out, you take maybe a cool-ish shower or a warm shower, then what happens is there's a compensatory cooling off of your core body temperature for the reasons we discussed earlier, and your body temperature will drop by 1 to 3 degrees, and it will make it much easier to get into sleep. Okay, so you've done everything correctly up until now. You got your morning routine from critical period 1, you got your afternoon routine, you saw some sunlight in the afternoon, you avoided caffeine in the 8 hours or 10 hours before bedtime, you're not drinking alcohol, you've cooled down the room, you're doing all these things right, you've dimmed the lights, et cetera, et cetera. What else can we do in order to optimize our sleep? Well, I always say behavioral tools first, then look to nutrition, then, if necessary, look to supplementation, and then, if still necessary, look to prescription drugs, obviously prescribed by a board-certified physician. Well, we've talked a lot about the behavioral tools for critical period 3. We have not talked a lot about the supplementation-based tools. There are supplements that for most people will greatly improve their ability to fall and stay asleep. And the 3 main supplements in that category or that kit of sleep supplements, and I've talked about these before, are magnesium threonate, so THREONATE, apigenin, 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 and theanine, THEANINE, theanine. Now, some important things to point out about mag-threonate, as it's called, apigenin, and theanine. First of all, you don't necessarily need to take all 3, although many people get a synergistic effect from taking all 3. In fact, you may not even need to take even one. What I recommend is that if you're already doing all the behavioral tools regularly and you're still having trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, well then, you might try one of the supplements within this sleep stack. They do have fairly wide margins for safety, although I should also say, anytime you're going to add or remove something from your supplement protocol, your nutritional program, you definitely want to talk to your physician. I don't just say that to protect us, I say that to protect you. I do want to mention a couple of broad contour tools that will impact your ability to sleep really well on a consistent basis. And the one that impacts the most number of people is weekends. Turns out that most everybody feels the impulse to sleep in on the weekend, especially if they've been out late the night before. However, the data show that keeping relatively consistent sleep and wake times is really going to enhance the quality and depth of your sleep. So if you stay out late one night, sure, you might allow yourself to sleep in an extra hour or so, but you should really try to avoid sleeping in longer than an hour beyond your normal wake-up time. That's right. If you normally get 8 hours of sleep and you wake up at 7 a.m., probably okay to wake up at 8 a.m. on the weekend or after a night out the night before, but try not to sleep until 11 or noon thinking that you're going to catch up on your sleep or that's better than waking up at a consistent time. It would be better to wake up at a consistent time, plus or minus an hour, and get a nap in the afternoon, provided that nap, again, isn't too long. Okay, so that's a lot of information and a lot of tools. And I suppose the one set of tools that I really didn't drill into too deeply, the ones related to jet lag and shift work. And again, please check out the episode on jet lag and shift work if that's relevant to you. But I think for most people who are going to sleep at night and are trying their best to sleep well at night and are trying their best to wake up in the morning at whatever hour and stay alert and focused throughout the day, maybe with a brief nap, the tools that I talked about today related to light, temperature, food, exercise, caffeine, supplements, and digital tools, I'm hoping will prove to be very useful for you. They certainly are all supported by excellent peer-reviewed research. And I should just emphasize again that most of the tools we talked about are completely zero cost. So while the supplements and some of the digital tools do carry some cost to them, I really want to encourage everybody to get your behaviors right. Get all of the things related to your timing of exercise and type of exercise in the best possible order and time of day. We talked about this critical period early in the day, and then another critical period in the middle of the day and the late afternoon, and then this third critical period in the middle of the night. Different tools for the different 3 critical periods. I promise that if you start to implement some, or ideally all of these tools, the quality of your sleep will increase tremendously. And of course, in doing so, the quality of your daytime alertness and your ability to focus will improve tremendously. Again, sleep is the absolute foundation of your mental health, your physical health, and your performance in all endeavors. So if there's one area of your life to really focus on and try and optimize, if your goal is to be happier and more productive and just have a better life overall, I can confidently say that sleep is really the thing to optimize.